Welcome to the Bikerian Podcast.
Hi, I'm Isla.
And I am Eric. And we interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast this week due to the big news that's been happening. We actually preempted a show that we recorded last week that was going to air this week in order to talk about the big issues going on at the border right now.
And the politicization of human rights.
And, you know, that's something that the first thought I had when these news articles started pouring in and the stories on the news stations was, are we really actually looking at a situation where the president of the United States is violating human rights, or at least close to it, in order to bargain and to be right? And I had a real problem with that, and I was really feeling it rise in me. And then you called me earlier this week and said we should do this now, and we both just agreed.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting thing to look into, and that's part of it. Was I knew I was going to want to get some understanding of why all of the digital world was exploding with all of this, what's going on in the detention centers. And so I have some, what should we start with?
Well, and we should say that we are recording this on the Tuesday before it's released. And so we have up to the minute news right now about where things are at. But one of the reasons we didn't want to wait on this was because so much is probably going to happen even in the next day or two. Or more horrifyingly, nothing's going to happen in the next day or two or even the next week. So
we're rooting for something's going to happen.
I'm rooting for that. I'm just a cynic. So
So I guess let's start with the first thing. So there's a lot of obviously rhetoric and chaos and throwing mud. And what I want to do is sweep as much of that away and sort of get down to some of the basic facts. And sort of what kicked off a lot of the current situation right now is in May. Do you want me to read this? Or?
Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead.
It's in May, Sessions announced that the U.S. was going to take a stricter stance on illegal crossings at the southwest border.
And we're all perfectly aware that it was Jeff Sessions. He's the bad guy here because Trump hasn't been saying that for months and years, really, right?
Well, I
think Sessions was mouthpiecing for
he was
the
delivering
administration.
an administrative policy. He is, however, the one who delivered it.
Okay.
And he said that they were going to take the stricter stance, and it was going to result in parents and children being separated rather than keeping them together in detention centers. So this is something in May. He said this. We know this policy is going to create that, and the exact quote here is, if you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you. That child will be separated from you as required by law. If you don't like that, don't smuggle children over our border.
And to be clear, I heard a quote from Trump earlier today where he backed that up. So they're not even changing their message at all. Trump actually, I don't remember the exact words, but it was something to the extent of, this is a deterrent so that people think twice about trying to come across the border, especially if they have kids.
Mm-hmm. And I will say that one of my favorite responses to that was actually a Republican senator, a Nebraska. So the Nebraskan Senator Ben Sasse, should look up the pronunciation, while defending the administration's efforts to tighten immigration enforcement in a Facebook post that he put up on Monday, June 15th. Is that Monday? I don't know what day we're at. What day was Monday?
It was the 16th.
There we go.
No, I'm sorry. Monday was the 18th.
Oh, because it's Tuesday.
Because it's Tuesday.
So just yesterday, Monday the 18th, he said, nonetheless, the senator, Republican senator, called the separation of families wrong and wrote, the choice between the American people does not have to be wicked versus foolish. This is wrong. Americans do not take children hostage, period.
Okay, so who was that?
Nebraskan Senator Ben Sasse.
From which party?
The Republican Party.
From the Republican Party.
Yeah, no. But I really liked his point, because in a lot of ways what Sessions and Trump are saying is we are going to take your children hostage.
Right.
And that's a very clear-cut way of expressing this is why we have a problem with this beyond party line.
Absolutely. And so, and I made a big deal just now about which party this person is from. And in some ways, I just politicized human rights. But I want to defend this only because you just made the point. This is now a nonpartisan thing. This is now a nonpartisan issue because both sides are coming out and saying, just no. Just this is not who we are as a country. This is not what we should be doing. These should not be bargaining chips. These should not be anything like that. There was also the CNN guy, which we might as well just get this out of the way because very seldomly does anyone actually have any credence when comparing Trump to Hitler.
There is that.
But it happened. So it was actually over the weekend. So Michael Hayden, who was nominated by Bush to lead the CIA. So we can assume that he's moderate to right-leaning, I would say. Tweeted out a photo of the Birkenau death camp at Auschwitz, writing, "Other governments have separated mothers and children." Hayden, who is director of the National Security Agency under President Bush and Bill Clinton, explains on CNN's Newsday Monday morning that his tweet was a warning of where the U.S. could be headed. "Let's run the clock back to 1933, which is really what I was trying to address," Hayden said. "And in 1933, what did we see in Germany? A cult of personality, a cult of nationalism, a cult of grievance, a press operation that looked like and was the Ministry of Propaganda, and then the punishing of marginalized groups."
There's our,
I don't think Trump is Hitler, but I think what we are doing and what he is doing right now looks a lot like that. This guy's right. Because he never actually said Trump's Hitler. He said this looks like what they saw in 1933.
Well, and I definitely have a strong reflex against any reference to Germany in that way. And I did feel like this was a legitimate question to ask in terms of the German people were, economically depressed.
Yes.
And looking for someone who would make it better.
Yeah.
And we have that situation. And what ended up occurring was pretty atrocious. And part of it, I think, happened because people stopped noticing what they had in common with each other.
Well,
like
let's at least take some comfort that is not actually what's happening right now. The American people are not rolling over and taking this. We've got bipartisan people coming out.
That is one of the things that I really appreciate is that, like Laura Bush's statement, she says, "I live in a border state. I appreciate the need to enforce and protect our international boundaries, but this zero tolerance policy is cruel. It is immoral, and it breaks my heart." And as someone who didn't always, agree with the Bush administration, I really feel like it's powerful for her to step forward and say, this is too extreme for us as Americans. And for this Nebraskan senator to say, we as Americans don't take children hostage. It's not what we do.
Right.
And I think that's important for us to embrace some aspect of our American identity that is about the values that we strive, the ideals we strive to live up to.
Yeah. And I heard earlier today that somebody local for us, Corey Gardner, had come out against it. And I've certainly had some disagreements with some of his policies, but I am finding at least a little bit of respect for a lot of these people that I had just written off as being probably against most of the things that I was for, and realizing, all right, we got at least something in common here. We're humans, and we believe that humans should be protected.
So one of the things that I looked into was there's a lot of, so one of the things that Session talks about is he knew that this would separate families as required by law. And that makes it sound like there's a law that states' families have to be separated from their children. And what it is there was a law passed in 1997 called the Flores Act, I think. Let me double check that. The Flores Agreement.
Flores Agreement, yes.
And what that did was it's that minor children had to be, released from custody or put into like the least restrictive, most nurturing environment possible.
Right.
And why this particular thing would separate children from families is that up through now, if a family had a minor child with them, then the needs of the minor child were the first thing considered in the situation. So the family had to be detained in a different kind of facility that addressed the needs of the child.
Right, because if the parents are going to be in jail awaiting a trial,
then they'll be separated from their parents. So
right, they needed to be put somewhere, and this was based on the idea that if somebody was caught coming across the border, and they would go to jail for breaking the law.
So they're now, then that's the difference, right? Sessions is criminally prosecuting them. Prior to this, it was often, unless there was another reason for like a violent behavior or, background concerns, someone crossing the border illegally would not be criminally prosecuted. They would be given a misdemeanor offense and therefore would either be released into the community with their children with like some kind of digital monitoring system,
right,
or held in a family detention center. And the family detention center had to meet the needs of the minor children.
Right.
And that was determined by a federal judge in 2014 when Obama, the Obama and the Bush administrations had both indicated that they didn't feel that the families with minor children should be held to the same standards as minor children who are on their own, who are unaccompanied. However, a federal judge said, oh, no, actually families need to be treated, if they have minor children, at that same level. So that was actually won through a court case in 2014 and ended the practice of families being kept in centers with children that weren't quite up to standards, or theoretically.
Yeah, and we need to be clear here that there is some culpability about where we're at based on the fact, we didn't really have much discussion and discourse over immigration when Obama was in office, other than some of the Republican senators and congressmen saying that they wanted stricter standards and all of that sort of thing. But in our research, one of the things that is obvious that I expected was that Obama wasn't particularly light on it by any means.
He was less dramatic. So he did, instead of doing in-person raids, he did paper raids. So they would evaluate the I-9s, I believe it is, of businesses, look for certain discrepancies that indicated they were hiring people that weren't necessarily legally able to work. And then they would Which
is a deterrent in and of itself. Because again, if you make it clear that there's probably going to be less opportunity here, it might be a deterrent.
It was effective. He was an effective, and the thing with the paper raids is they're significantly less expensive.
He deported a lot of people based on it.
Yeah, the raids that Trump started doing, he didn't necessarily do more. He just did more expensive, more dramatic raids, and he talks about it more. Obama didn't have an agenda to kind of be tough on immigration.
He didn't get elected on the basis of building a wall.
He did not get elected on the basis of building a wall, so it wasn't something that he spent a lot of time going on talking about. He also tended to focus very specifically on things like they call them the paper raids, or people who had committed violent crimes or had felony offenses. And that doesn't mean that everybody that was deported under Obama was a criminal. There are plenty of people who have
theory, by the letter of the law, they are here illegally. They are criminals.
Okay, that's fair. But I mean, just in terms of the next level,
he was going for the next level of have they committed a violent crime in this country? Where are they at in their different statuses to become a citizen? There was a little acronym called DACA that was about probably the biggest thing I think Obama really did.
And that's a deferred action program. So that actually was anybody who registered for DACA was given a temporary Social Security number, and they had to either do 2 years of school or 2 years of military service in order to be eligible. And essentially, what they were registering for was deferred deportation. They were basically putting themselves on a list to say, "I know I'm here undocumented," and and the hope was they call these kids, right, the dreamers, because the hope was that this would give them a chance to be part of the system and show how they, so they put a lot of trust and faith in the government and said, we're going to take this risk to see if there can be a path to citizenship for us.
Right. And the only reason I wanted to illustrate all of this was to say that, the steps that got us here are not just the Trump administration. These are things that have been around for a while. There was goods and bad things about everybody's immigration, policies probably for the last 20 years. But in this case...
Well, and so this one article I found that I sent to you was from actually January of 2016. So I don't really think we can hold Trump accountable for this one. And essentially, we don't like to fund social services. And what happens is when unaccompanied minors arrive at the border, then they have to be obviously treated in this other way. So a lot of times what they do is they try to put them in foster families. And when there's a large influx, they don't necessarily do their due diligence. And so this New York Times article that came out in January of 2016 said that the Department of Health and Human Services had actually placed more than a dozen immigrant children in the custody of human traffickers. And, there were like 15 more that they said.
Now, I did read the article, and let's clarify that the human traffickers were agricultural primarily, although there were found to be some sex trafficking rings that were going on with that.
Yeah, and sometimes...
And we mentioned this in previous shows, but it needs to be mentioned again. Human trafficking is by and large
agricultural and domestic workers.
Yes.
Like nobody wants to outlaw those two things. I don't know why.
Right.
Because that would put a stop to human trafficking. Yes. Okay. My sarcasm can be moved on from. So this problem is complex. It's larger than parties. So we don't want to simplify it down to, bad Trump, whatever. However, he's the guy in charge right now. And that's the thing that I think is really important when people bring up, well, Obama did this or Clinton did this or Bush did that. It doesn't actually matter because right now, the person who is in a position of authority is Trump. It is his job to set policy, and he set a policy that Sessions enacted, which is to criminally prosecute these parents, knowing it would mean they'd be separated from their children. It was an attempt to deter people, and it was done knowing that it would create this situation.
Exactly. And I've heard quotes from everybody, even Homeland Security, folks talking about how they're just doing what they were told to do. Mm-hmm. And this is the letter of the law. And again, we're in another one of those positions where we can, debate the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law and all of that. But Trump already told us exactly why they're doing it. He wants us to be a deterrent. He figures less people will try to come over if they're worried about getting caught and having that go badly.
Well, and so one of the things that I think also needs to be acknowledged is that the net immigration result right now from Mexico is 0. And that doesn't even just account for deportation. It's that in the last 10 years, immigration from Mexico into America has decreased by 26%.
Right.
And so...
But that's also one of those statistics because 26% is meaningless. How many people is it really? What do those people look like? How many kids are in camps right now?
1,995.
Okay.
So, however, there's this rhetoric that, there's this influx of immigrants. And the reality is that the current percentage of immigrants in our country is lower.
It's kind of funny because I think America has been the melting pot for so long. And I mean, I think since about 1790, probably, we've been led to believe that this is a place that people want to come to. Land of opportunity, American dream, white picket fences. And realistically, we haven't been that. And these numbers are showing that. And that's just Mexican immigration, but I would imagine all immigration's probably down in general.
We're down. We're not as high. The highest that it was 1890, 15% of the population. Right now it's at about 12%.
Right.
And they go with percentages rather than numbers simply because the world population is so much larger.
Right.
And I think that speaks to what you were saying as well, is that it's not easy to immigrate to any country. Most countries that have borders, have rules, and usually the people that they want to attract are people who have money to invest in the country, have skills that they want to bring into their country. Like, most countries are pretty picky.
There was a few years ago, I had a friend that moved to New Zealand, and I became really kind of obsessed with the idea of maybe moving down to New Zealand.
Xena was filmed there.
And Lord of the Rings, actually. That was my motivation. I was like, I want to go live where they filmed Lord of the Rings.
And Xena.
And so I looked into it with my partner, and we were just kind of going through it. And it's like, wow, it's a point system. Do you have a degree? How many languages do you speak? Do you have skills in these particular fields? And you could just total up your points and see if you cross the threshold, even get in. We are by no means here in the U.S. the hardest country to get into.
And it's not, and that's the tricky part. So Canada has a refugee program, much like we do. You can seek asylum.
Yeah.
And their approach, they did a pilot program that I thought was really brilliant, where when a family comes, a group of Canadian families actually sign up to spend a year helping orient them and integrating them to the country. So that group of families will help them get their driver's license and drive them around and help them pay their rent and figure out the bureaucracy of things. I mean, we'd all kind of like to have a group of Canadian families helping us, but
it's very socialist of them.
Yeah.
But in a positive way, right? We'll do this and we'll make them a ward of the state essentially while they integrate.
Yeah, and what it does is the reason that, for instance, we have policies around family members getting a preferential. So if you're here and you want to bring a family member over, they used to, I don't really know where we're at and all the changes, have a little bit more of a preference because you could sponsor them. And part of that is really just social cohesion.
Right.
The more integrated you are into a community, the more likely you are to participate and be a good contributor, to be less likely to have angry feelings about where you're at. It's basic.
I mean, it makes sense. And regardless, in this country, we've really just sort of had the doors open, and there's some words on some statue somewhere that say they will welcome the sick and the poor and the huddled masses and all of that, because that was what we've lived under. But people don't even really want to come here as much as they did. And I mean, I'll be honest, I feel like, here in Colorado, we have a very strong economy, but we're only slightly below the national average when it comes to unemployment. So this idea that there's not enough jobs here, or anything like these arguments that are made, even if they were relevant, they might have been relevant 15 years ago.
Well, there's a couple things. So there's been a lot of studies on the impact of immigrants in our communities, specifically the economic impact, because that's often the sort of the boogeyman tactic, right? They're going to cost a lot of money and they're going to take our jobs.
You're giving me this look that this is going to be a Bikerian stat.
Well, it's just really interesting to me because, for example, during the recession of 2008, the states and areas that had large immigrant populations actually had a lower dip and a faster rebound. And what they've shown consistently is that the immigrant population is very compatible with the native population, and that's the wrong word to use, the white precursor population, I don't know, that lives
The
here
existing
already.
population.
The existing immigrant population that is not the indigenous people.
Yes.
Like, these words are so hard.
Well,
But it's, if you want to be accurate, right? Like there's the indigenous people who are the native
yes.
people, and then there's the rest of us who immigrated first.
And are many generations deep at this point, probably,
Yeah,
or at least a few.
So there's citizens who are part of the regime, and then there's the new immigrants, documented and undocumented. And what they found is that the more recent immigrants and the jobs that they want, the skills that they have, and the jobs that even the laborer jobs that exist that tend to be taken or executed by the current residents, there's actually more of a synergy in that. There's less competition than people. It's been politicized, right? Like this whole story has been politicized, and it's not actually dealing with the facts.
Yeah.
So it's been like reading up on it that, and they said like sanctuary counties that restrict when they will hold immigrants in custody beyond their release date, solely based on ICE detainer requests, are economically stronger and experience less crime than non-sanctuary counties. Sanctuary counties have a median annual income that are $4,000 higher, poverty rates that are 2.3% lower, and unemployment rates that are 1.1% lower than non-sanctuary counties. This is across the country.
Right.
Furthermore, they experience on average 35.5 fewer crimes per 10,000 people than non-sanctuary counties. So there's this like idea that being welcoming to immigrants and including them in your community is somehow dangerous, and yet the facts remain that it's not.
Yeah. And, it's hard to talk about what's going on here without talking about the immigration and the need for a policy this strict is really, I think, the gist of what, the point that we're trying to make with this is that immigrants are not bringing down our society.
They're actually holding it up.
Right. It's not a negative thing. We can look at crime stats for immigrants, but then we can look at crime stats for non-immigrants. Like, it doesn't matter. We're going to break it down. There's always going to be some bad people. Of course, there's some drug trafficking going on across the border. There are some negatives, but at this point, to the main point of why we decided we needed to do this now, this is a legitimate human rights issue that's putting us on par with places that people would never want to hear our country compared to.
No, for real. Well, and so over the years, I've been really curious because my perspective on this is obviously a more liberal party line. I mean, that's not where I'm getting it, but I fit in there pretty well. And so the folks that I've talked to who oppose who I shouldn't say oppose it, but who support like the super strong deterrence, it really comes down to there has to be a consequence when someone breaks the law. So my question is, if what we want is a consequence for when someone breaks the law, could we come up with something that actually serves our country? Because what we're doing right now, it violates our identity as Americans. We're taking children hostage, and it costs us a lot of money. It's not helping our economy, and it's driving away our future citizens. It's driving away future residents, like immigrants
That want to come here legally.
And honestly, the people that want to come here and want to be part of our country and invest in it.
If I was living outside of this country in just about anywhere right now, just looking at this, I would be deterred. And that's whether or not I was looking to get across the border to earn some money picking vegetables, or if I was a doctor in some other country trying to, see if I could contribute meaningfully and take advantage of some of the, perks of being a U.S. citizen while bringing something actually usable to the table. I mean, I work in the tech company, and there's been a lot of talk about the different visas and stuff like that. I'm wondering how many of these tech genius people from foreign countries that we've let in on these visas are actually just saying, on second thought, never mind. I can tell you that other countries are getting just as good at tech, because my company's based in Israel, as are many other companies that I'm running into. We're actually based here, but our entire R&D department and all of our developers and everything are all Israeli.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting so far ahead of the game. Like, just assuming that, because you were born anywhere near the Bay Area or a tech epicenter in the States makes you a genius or whatever. No. We don't have that anymore. And so, even this is affecting us in a bad way, even with the people that Trump would have to acknowledge would be desirable.
Right. Well, 2016 was the highest number of people in the recording of this experience that actually revoked their U.S. citizenship. Something like 5,300 people. So it's definitely costing us, although I will say that the theory is nobody really knows why. The theory is it has something to do with taxes. So, we could call that, what is it? Correlated or coincidentally, the same thing. But it's a trend. It's a trend that the way that we're doing things is not attracting and is not attracting new people to our communities. And our birth population is down, right? Like we don't have large families, and we have a bunch of baby boomers about to retire.
Yeah.
And that's one of the articles that I was reading. They were talking about, like, without a strong immigrant population, we're going to be in a lot of trouble when they start retiring, not just from the perspective of things like Social Security, literally from the perspective of jobs that need to be filled.
It's interesting because luckily automation is coming and that'll solve that problem.
Well, there you go. So then we'll have, so that one's not going to be a problem, but it's just something to think about that this rhetoric and this fear right now, there's a reactivity around sort of pushing immigrants away. And I think, you look at some of these countries in Europe that are pretty much begging people, like, we'll give you a free education and a house and, just come here and have babies because their population is shrinking.
Right.
And we could put ourselves in a similar position.
Well, and that is all stuff that we can easily debate again in the future here as we get this sorted out. But at the moment, right now, this is a legitimate issue. I do think that America and Americans are going to do the right thing and that this isn't going to be allowed to stand. And hopefully by the time somebody is hearing this, this will be old news or there'll be an update in some positive way. I can't guarantee that by the first airing, but we talked about...
Good.
Oh, I was going to say we talked about some calls to action.
Okay, so I'll read this Fox News because I love that this is from Fox News, and then you can read a call to action.
Okay.
How's that sound? So this is from an article on Fox News about the detention center. At McAllen, Texas Detention Center, the Associated Press reported that hundreds of immigrant children waited in a series of cages created by metal fencing. One cage had 20 children inside of it. Bottles of water, bags of chips, and large foil sheets intended to serve as blankets were scattered around the facility.
Wow.
On Capitol Hill, Michigan Republican Representative Fred Upton called for an immediate end to this ugly and inhumane practice, adding, "It's never acceptable to use kids as bargaining chips in a political process." Kansas GOP Senator Pat Roberts said he is against using parental separation as a deterrent to illegal immigration.
So here's the thing. I want to urge anyone listening to this. I would assume if you like what we do on this podcast, you probably are the type of person who has a dog in this hunt. So first thing, don't let this be political. I know, even it was hard for us while we were talking about this to not fall into the Trump's the bad guy, the Republicans are the bad guys. We tried to look at this from, the things that got us here, and it was both parties. Obama, did plenty of this, just didn't make the news. Did plenty to get this set up to where it's at right now, and it has been made worse. I'm not really defending anything about it, but everybody is waking up to this. So resist the urge to get into any debates and make this about the Democrats or the Republicans or even just Trump. Yes, Trump is pushing this, and that needs to stop. But he's doing it as a person. His party's not behind him. It's not even the Republicans as a blanket statement. Don't make this political. This is really a human rights thing. The second one.
You kind of did both of them, so I'll do this one. Call your representatives and your senators and let them know you want a better solution, that you don't want this to be about one party or the other, that you want this to be about actually solving this problem and not using children as hostages.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like this is actually a really positive thing because we've got elections coming up here in 5 months. And I will tell you that we have a rare opportunity because anybody who's up for re-election right now is going to be terrified to not do what their constituents want. And it's as simple as calling them and telling them, make this stop.
Make it stop. That's our message.
So that's what we'll be doing this week. We'll get back to our regularly scheduled show for the next one. You've probably been seeing the snippets for it, so pardon the dust here as we decided to jump in on this. We're also going to skip our Bicurian moments this week since we ran a little bit long already, but we look forward to hearing any comments and stuff. And do you want to close us out?
No. Am I allowed to say that? Find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or email podcast@bicurian.com with your thoughts, opinions, feedback. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, and have a great week.